I think the worst thing we can do as base coaches is just like kind of be disengaged, right? We see people just kind of filling the spot and not actually using that as a moment to connect with the athletes.
Welcome to The Plug, your go-to resource for athletes, families, and coaches as we navigate the sports world. I'm Jess.
And I'm Alexa, and today we're talking all things base coaching. This is one of my favorite topics of all time when it comes to coaching. So I'm excited to dive into what makes good base coaches, what good qualities of base coaches, decision-making, strategies, all the things that go into base coaching. So we'll start with our hot takes.
Base coaches should be the guidelines.
Okay. Be convicted about your decisions. It's convicted. I think that when it comes to base coaching, I think one, just from a personality standpoint, we've talked about this in a couple other episodes to be honest, but the kids can feel you as the base coach, and so you have to understand, one, what persona, what are you putting off, right? And then I think, your kids will need different things throughout at different times. And so sometimes my kids need my energy, and so I need to be a little bit more outspoken, a little bit more energetic in my role as a base coach. And other times they don't really necessarily need my energy, they just need my direction, need my guidance. So I think throughout the season and even throughout weekends, you have to kind of have a feel for, one, what am I putting off to my team? Especially as third base coach, typically that's where the signs come from. And so every time, that player, the last thing they do before they get in the box is they look at the third base coach. And so really understanding, am I giving off good vibes? And then also, what does my team need in this moment? Do I need to shift kind of my approach based on where they're at?
Mm-hmm. I think coaches that are engaged, it's so important that you are interacting with the athlete every single pitch, that there's some sort of just engagement that's happening there, I think. And then also whenever you are coaching first, you got to run around first, you coach in third, you got to run around third, having conversations with those athletes that are on base, and then figuring out between your coaching staff who's talking to the runner on second base. So I think engagement is so important to making sure that those coaches really can be the guidelines, that there's trust that's being developed between the coach and the athletes so that they are ready to go and perform.
Yeah, I think from a just roles perspective, when you're on the bases, obviously that's a coaching staff decision as far as you need to get on the same page of what each of your roles are. And so I think a good rule of thumb to start is that the first base coach is responsible for getting that runner to second base, and the third base coach is responsible for getting them home. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I think there could be some different nuances within your specific coaching staff, but as a first base coach, my job is to try to get that runner to two. So whether that's stretching a single into a double or, sneaking in a steal, I'm trying to find unique ways to get them in scoring position. The third base coach is trying to find unique ways to get them to home. So I think, again, you can have your own little, nuts and bolts and specifics for your group, but you got to find what works for you. I think base coaches, it's important for them to be on the same page, understand how much, there's teams that kind of operate solely like third base coach is going to make all the calls, make all the shots, but then there's other coaching staffs that may have a little bit more trust with each other and may give the first base coach a little bit of bandwidth to kind of, send that runner at first kind of on their own if they see something, that they can steal a base or whatever. I think that's dependent upon the coaching staff as far as how much trust there is there. And then I think there always has to be some sort of, obviously you hope that you're kind of on the same page with your time that you spend with your coaching staff outside of the, field, but when you're actually on the field, you have to have some sort of way to communicate with each other. So I know we do that a lot, regardless of who's coaching third, if the third base coach is the one calling the signs, which usually they are, they're probably going to have a gut, but sometimes you need to be able to pass some information on across the diamond. So sometimes that's just you're just giving the sign that you want to happen.
Right.
If chest is a sign and you want that sign, you just kind of pat your chest, or you just have this kind of special eye contact that you get their attention and communicate. Maybe there's a specific system that you use that you're able to communicate with that other coach. So I think making sure that you understand what are your roles, what kind of what you allow, especially the first base coach, if they're not the one giving signs, what can they do? do they have the ability to do to override, potentially the third base coach? And then how are you guys going to communicate, when you are on the field? I think those are important pieces.
I think it's also important that your athletes feel that connectivity, because if the job of the first base coach is to get them to second and the job of the third base coach is to get them home, there has to be connectivity throughout all of that so that there's trust that happens with the athlete, because you don't want that first base coach that maybe doesn't get any of the say all of a sudden trying to get them to second base and then gets them thrown out, and now the next runner is maybe hesitant because that third base coach is yelling across at the first base coach, and it just creates a lot of animosity there and instead of togetherness. So I think having those conversations ahead of time, building trust, and then when you do get somebody thrown out, like, you just gotta own it, right? I do.
I don't. I never get anybody thrown out.
That's a lie. When we get someone thrown out, we take ownership of that. So those glares across the field, that's our...
They mean something.
Yes, they definitely mean something.
They get the point across, usually. I think the communication side is important, I would say, as a coaching staff, but then you were starting to hit into it with coaching staff to players. I think, never assume. I mean, it's as simple as, you cannot repeat the number of outs. You cannot repeat stupid phrases like, freeze on a line drive enough, because we're all human, right? And so I think that we have to make sure that we are not assuming that they know, that there's a constant reminding. I think the worst thing we can do as base coaches is just kind of be disengaged, right? We see people just kind of filling the spot and not actually using that as a moment to connect with the athlete. So one rule of thumb, that I have as a first base coach especially is, I kind of walk down with the runner as the runner's running to first base. I kind of walk down with them. So I'm kind of step for step with them, especially if, that gives me an opportunity to kind of sneak them to second base if there's an opening there, if no one's covering second. And then I kind of walk back to the base, and I'm right there with them at the base in their ear until the pitch really is coming. And I've gotten in trouble sometimes by some crazy umpires that get in the coach's box, right? Because I'm literally in their ear at first base until the last second. But usually I'm giving them the situation of the game, right? And then I'm also making sure that they know the sign. Yeah. So they should know the sign, but I'm reminding, hey, did you get that? Hey, did you get that? To make sure that, obviously, yes, they need to know the signs, but ultimately it's my responsibility as the base coach to assure that they got it and they're going to execute it and they know what's going on. And hopefully that's just as simple, yes, I got it. But if not, then you can provide that kind of information that they need in that moment. So I think, the worst thing you can do is just stand back, right, and just not do anything. Even at third base, if someone gets to third, right, I'm up in their ear, constantly giving them feedback, talking to them about the situation until, right before the pitch is had. And I think, obviously, the third base coach has the responsibility, typically. Sometimes you might pick first base, but traditionally it is third base to give the signs. So, you have to make sure that, obviously, that gets accomplished. And then I think outside of that, obviously, there's a lot of stuff that gets shouted out at hitters. And we have to make sure that those are productive. And what I mean by that is, one, they should not be mechanical. Correct. We should never be shouting, really from anywhere, but especially the coaches on the bases. Mechanical feedback does nothing in the moment like that, but you need to know what the hitter needs. So we know that mechanics are not the thing. However, hey, don't forget to, don't drop your shoulder. That is a no-go in that moment. Now, I do think there are cues that help hitters, and you have to know what those cues are specific to each kid. So it should not be just a one-size-fits-all approach of, just shouting out, hey, you got this, hey, battle with two. There's some cliche things that just kind of, don't really mean anything at that point. I think you have to really dig into each hitter and what makes them tick. What is going to, what's going to get them to that spot. And I think it's okay to ask them that. What do you need? What's a cue that helps you? What's a good reminder for you when you step in the box? So making sure that that's productive. We got to get rid of the cliches. We got to get rid of the communication that doesn't really do anything other than just hear your voice, right? It has to be productive. We have to avoid mechanics. And we have to make it be something that can help them compete in the box in that moment.
Yeah, and I think going back to just being in their ear on the bases, I was going to say too, is it is important to give a lot of the scenario type of things, but also giving them a cue of what to look for. So for example, if a pitcher has a changeup that's pretty easily detectable that they're looking for so that they can steal on that pitch, or if a catcher has more of a lazy type of setup and you're waiting for that ball in the dirt and then you feel like they can go. Being able to talk to them about that stuff too, feeding them the right energy there so that they know as soon as that changeup happens that they're going, and it's not like I should have went kind of moment, versus being able to really just like instill that in them. And then I think the other thing is helping them kind of look at where their fielders are at. So knowing depth of outfielders, knowing shifts that are happening, knowing how far away is the shortstop from second base, can I make it there on a steal just because of their positioning, and then kind of letting them play in the factor of where their speed is at as a runner, making sure they're aggressive every single time in their leadoffs and those types of things, really getting into some of the details there of being able to help them be the best base runners that they can be.
Yeah, I think, what you hit on there was just this idea that it's situational. It's understanding the situation, how many outs, and where, what are we trying to accomplish here? What's the score? What do we need to do? But also it's the strategy side of it. Mm-hmm. It's understanding positioning and shifting and maybe weaknesses that we kind of hit on. That's to me where base coaches kind of elevate themselves and separate themselves, is when you're really, base coaches are what you said, the guide, right? Mm-hmm. So in a best case scenario, we're not necessarily making the decisions for the runners to go or not go. Probably the most that will happen is third base, mm-hmm. if we're obviously sending a runner or not. But even just like out of the box, like as a first base coach, I kind of want them to be committed and like searching for two without me telling them to go two. Like I want them in that mindset. So obviously that's a practice thing. That's kind of your guys' coach's philosophy, but that's our philosophy. Is we would rather just be, like you said, the guardrails. We want the athletes to be kind of running their show essentially, and we're just there to kind of guide and support and find those little things that we can steal, basically bases, like steal bases, steal runs. That's really, to me, what we're there for. Mm-hmm.
And guidelines, not people who actually physically move them forward. I saw that this past weekend in a young game that athlete should have been out. Yeah. So as base coaches, we're not actually physically touching the athlete to get them to go forward. Yeah. So I think that's an important reminder.
Yeah, we cannot do that. So I think, just a short recap to what we've talked about so far, just one, an understanding of your guys' philosophy as a coaching staff. What are your roles when you get out to the bases? What are your signs? Making sure you're on the same page about that. Communicating. I think when we communicate, the other thing we didn't really talk about is having a common language, right? Mm-hmm. And that should be done in practice, right? What is your language? How, for example, one of them is tagging up, right, from home, especially from third to home. What is your language going to be? Like, I always say the same thing when I'm coaching third base. It's like, hey, I'm going to say go, or I forgot what the other word I say. No, I say, gosh dang it. I say go as in like you're going to go when you tag up, or I say draw. That's what it is. I say draw. Yeah. And that means that they're going to go, but they're going to draw through. Mm-hmm. So they're going to take like 3 or 4 steps and then they're going to come back. So that language that's just one example. Like that needs to be consistent across the board, so that in the moment, one, they know what you're saying. Yeah. They understand it. Because if you're giving them language that they've never heard before, or that's inconsistent from other people that they've heard that from, we're going to lose it, right? Mm-hmm. So there has to be a language, a foundational language that is the team's language, right? And then you execute that in the game. So it's not new information. It's just really reminders, and it's giving them extra little, kudos along the way. So I think, base coaching is I think we need to be more engaged. That would be my challenge to coaches, is to be more engaged and provide feedback that is valuable, not just like cues that just land in the air and don't really do anything. So, and then I think when it comes to, maybe we want to hit on, before we end here, some of the strategy side of base coaching. I think before we get into that though, like my last encouragement is the players feed off of you. Mm-hmm. So I think really, like, we create the vibe of base running. And so base running is something that I'm really passionate about. And so as a coach, like, my passion, the hope is that rubs off on them. Yeah. And my energy and my approach and my perspective and my, just my vibe, the hope is that portrays on them. Mm-hmm. And so I want them to be okay to take risks. I want them to not be hesitant. I want them to be committed. That's the other thing is, as base coaches, the worst thing we can do is be, that was part of my hot take, is like, you're not convicted, you're unsure. And so we see that at times of like, the coach doesn't really give them like anything because they're unsure. And I think the worst thing we can do is project that hesitation onto our kids, that uncertainty. It's a fast game, and we got to make the decision. As a third base coach, I do know that it helps to kind of ride up the line. So if you ride up the line as your runner's kind of rounding third and you kind of get closer to home, it buys you more time to let the play develop, to see what's happening in the outfield. Did they bobble it? Are they, closing in quickly? Did it get by them? If we just kind of stay at third base and we try to that means we have to make the decision before they get to third base. We don't let the play develop enough. So I think it helps to kind of ride with that player at third. And then at first, I think it's more so the study of prior to, right? I think that is important, obviously, at third base. But where are my outfielders positioned? What are their arms like? And studying that ahead of time to determine, like, what's the ability to get to, second base in that moment. So I think just, like, we have to try to let the play develop as much as we can and not rush ourselves into the decision. But then once we decide, we gotta go for it. And we have to know when we can kind of err on the side of aggressiveness, and when we can err on the side of, maybe we should be a little bit more cautious. So, like, for example, if I'm coaching third and I'm kind of in the middle of my lineup and we've got 2 outs, right, and there's kind of a potential bang-bang play, I'm probably going to err on the side of caution more to give my 4-hitter, for example, the chance the next at bat because I'm in the middle of my lineup. So I know that, hey, I maybe could have scored that girl, but I didn't want to cut us out of a chance right in the middle of our lineup to make it even a bigger inning. Versus maybe if I'm on the tail end of our lineup, I might try to squeeze one in there. I might try to send her in that moment. So I think those are a few of the decision makings of, like, understanding when can I push, when can I not. A lot of that's based on where you're at in the lineup. You need to know what the next hitter is in your lineup, and based on how their day is going, based on what kind of hitter they are, that will help determine if you're going to send them in the moment. But if you're not prepared for that, if you're not looking ahead of what's coming up the next couple of bats, if you don't, what's this pitcher like? Maybe this pitcher, we haven't been able to hit her or him, and we got to take advantage and stretch this inning that we've had because we haven't had any other opportunities, and we don't know if we'll get another one. Or, hey, we've been hitting this person, and so if I want to stretch this one, I don't really worry that we're not going to get another chance coming down the road. So I think the preparation is so key to knowing what's coming up in your order, knowing the feel of the game and what's kind of happened to that point, and what kind of momentum does your team need? I think that's, it's not a black and white game, but I do think if you can have those thoughts ahead of time, just like we ask our players to obviously be thinking ahead, I think that those decisions in the moment become a lot easier and a lot more convicting versus hesitant.
It's kind of like as that third base coach, the one giving the signs, it's having plan A, B, and C in your mind. It's like, as I have this string of hitters together, plan A is so-and-so is going to get on, so-and-so is going to bunt, so-and-so is going to hit them in. And then when so-and-so doesn't get on, and plan A was that the next person was going to bunt, now we've got to adjust from there. And so being able to have that plan of attack, so then that way when it comes to the actual base coaching and the desire to send them or not, or decision to send them or not, becomes a little bit easier because you have that plan kind of laid out for you if everything were to go perfectly, and then if it doesn't, you kind of pivot from there.
And even down to, like, pinch hitters, like knowing in advance before, in the between, like, the half innings or whatever, it's like, hey, like, we got such and such on the bench, like, hey, we might look for, if this girl comes up, a pinch hit opportunity, like that. The more that we can think ahead, the slower the game is. And I think what happens is the game speeds up, just like it speeds up on the players, it speeds up on the coaches, and we're like, shoot, I should have called it. Even as simple as, you're thinking about calling a squeeze, which a squeeze is, when the runner on third base is stealing home, and so the batter has to get the bunt down. You have to know that in advance, right? So I know that before that next, hey, if this girl doesn't get the job done, I'm going to squeeze this girl. And then because that's going to affect if you give signs like this, like normal traditional signs, you have to know that in advance, right? Because you can't just, like, that's the other thing I would say, don't just be the one sign person. Don't just give a sign when the sign's on. You have to make sure that you give signs all the time. That's why people are going to wristbands, because they're not smart enough. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of strategy around that, but I do think that we need to make sure, and our kids are never going to get better. Like, we can't just give signs when the sign is on. We have to give signs frequently. We have to make sure we're in advance. So if it's a longer sign, like depending on your signal system, don't just give a longer sign when it's due, like give a longer sign ahead of time, for example. So I think there's some strategy around that, but making sure that you're thinking ahead, you're understanding the strengths of your hitters, and then you're understanding what the game calls for. So if you're not scratching up anything, right, like I might have to put some bunts down, I might have to try to steal a runner if I get a runner on base, I might have to do a hit and run. I love hit and runs when one, the pitcher's throwing hard and we can't catch up. Two, we're being defensive, right? We're not swinging. We're not being aggressive on strikes. We're taking a lot of strikes. Three, when someone's just not hitting great, right? When they're kind of in a little bit of a, tough situation hitting-wise, and they need to see the bat hit the ball, and they need a little bit less thinking in their brain. I like to call a hit and run to kind of get the wheels moving a little bit without any thoughts going in the hitter's brain. So you need to understand, when do you need to create as an offensive play caller by trying to, call bunt and runs and hit and runs and steals, versus when do you just need to let your hitters, and your offense do what they do best. So.
And I think the thing as far as being engaged as a third base coach too, and kind of to your point about signs and always giving signs, is like that is another way to show engagement. I think especially I know the young ages, like when they're first kind of learning to step out of the box and look at the coach and those types of things, is like that's not going to happen if you don't give them a reason to look every single time, whether that's a sign or just like even just an encouragement. If you're kind of the bland third base coach, like they're not going to want to look down there for any reason, because they're just going to
still, and you want to hit and run and bunt a lot or whatever your offensive identity is, then you need to be practicing that in the game. And that's not just hitting, that's base running. And I think base running is and maybe we'll do a separate podcast on this, I don't know, but I think base running is an underdeveloped piece of the game. It's one thing, you got to get on base, you got to hit, but then what do you do with that? And I think that I'm super passionate about it, because it's not about speed, it's about smarts. And I think that side of it, so whatever you're going to call in the game, it can't be new to them, right? If you're trying to go first to third, you need to practice that in practice. If you're trying to do squeezes, you got to practice that in practice so that it's something that they're used to, that it's not new. It's not, because if it's new, they're going to panic. They're not going to get the job done. So we have to normalize that, and whatever we practice, that's what game mode's going to be like.
Yeah. I think one other piece that I had as far as just them and base running side of things, and more the strategy piece of it, is you got to know when you're trying to push even just to get to second base. I think there's the other thing we've talked about before of like, there's times where we're going to steal a runner that we traditionally wouldn't steal because of who we know is up after that. So, like, if they're the third out getting to second base, then we know that person's up to bat to start the next inning, is another way we think about it, too. Or, if they do end up being safe, then now we have a run scoring position, too. So I think it's all of those strategy pieces kind of coming together, that engagement coming together, just the thinking ahead piece of it for the coaches as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a ton probably more strategies. I mean, not being predictable is something as coaches of like, even as simple as pitch runner comes in, usually a pinch runner is going to steal, right? So I think the defense kind of has that vibe. It doesn't mean that, like, if you have an above average runner, like, I think that they should be able to steal the base every time, but I think we can kind of get into like, oh, pinch runner, okay, we're going to steal, or I think finding those creative ways to catch the other team by surprise. So, as a third base coach or first base coach, if I'm, given steals there, like I'm looking for, in a perfect world, I'm looking for a changeup time to count. I'm trying to kind of predict when I'm going to see a changeup to try to steal a base. Maybe it's a heavy drop ball pitcher. Maybe it's kind of a wild pitcher. Like I'm trying to catch the other team a little bit by surprise and try to beat them to the punch a little bit. Try to kind of get in their brains and understand what their philosophies are, to try to take a step ahead. So, yeah.
All right. Well, there's lots there when it comes to base coaching. So we will continue to just share some other coaching series ones that we have coming up, but really wanted to specifically hit on base coaching today. So thank you for joining on this week's episode of The Plug, your go-to resource for athletes, families, and coaches as we navigate the sports world.